Hey friends, what's going on? Thank you so much for stopping by and checking out the channel as always. If this is your first time here, then welcome. I'm super glad that you're here. And if you are a returning viewer, then I'm super stoked that you decided to stick around. So in today's video, we're going to be talking about mixing and how to keep it really simple and effective. Let's just go ahead and jump straight into the video. So typically, as mixers, we try to overcomplicate things. Mixing is really cool and it's kind of mysterious to some extent, and because of those reasons, I think we try to sometimes make it more involved and more interesting than we need to, and we feel like we have to throw 1,000 plugins on everything to make it sound the way that we want to, and we sometimes presume that that's what the best mixers in the world do to get the sounds that they get. But that is definitely not always true. So really fast, I'm going to give you 5 different mixing tips that I've learned over the years that have really helped improve my mixes, and I want to share them with you today. So the first one, and I honestly tend to forget this all the time, is that the better you can make your tracks sound on the front end, the better and easier your mixes are going to be. So what do I mean? Spend as much or more time actually capturing the sound on the front end as you do mixing the sound on the back end. Let me give you an example. If you're going to record a guitar cab, for example, spend time actually putting that guitar cab in different places of the room and actually using your ears to hear where it sounds like it resonates the best in the room. After you find a place that sounds really good, it's not too dark, it's not too bright, it feels like it's gonna sit well in the mix, then spend time placing a microphone on the cabinet. Start moving it from the outside of the speaker towards the inside of the speaker, and maybe farther from the speaker and closer to the speaker, and see if you can actually capture the sound that you're looking for that you hear in your head right there at the beginning, instead of just randomly placing a speaker in the room and randomly throwing a microphone on it and then trying to force it to sound the way you want to in post. If you are more intentional on the front side, it's going to be easier to mix that sound on the back end. Period, full stop. I recently had the privilege of going to Andrew Masters' studio, and personally, one thing that I've been struggling with for a while is getting really good drum sounds. And Andrew invited me to play on his drum kit, and the second that I sat down at the drum kit, put on some headphones, and started playing, it immediately sounded incredible. Now, mind you, this was playing live. This wasn't me playing through a bunch of plugins or anything on the back end, and it wasn't mixed. It was literally just, they sounded amazing as I was playing them. Now, if they were running through outboard gear, I'm not sure, but they sounded so good. And I asked Andrew, I was like, hey man, what mics do you have on these drums? And he says, it's not the mics. It's actually just how they're tuned. It's how they're placed in the room. It's maybe the mic position on the drums. But it's the shells. It's all of those other things, the things that we don't think about that actually come together to make a really incredible and polished sound. So speaking of drums, for example, make sure you're spending time tuning your drums. Make sure you spend time placing your drums in the room and figure out where they sound like they resonate the best in the room. Spend time actually placing the microphones on the drums and capturing a really good sound with the way that the capsule is actually facing towards the drum head. Make sure you spend time doing all of these things. It makes a massive difference. And also, this is a huge one, make sure your drums are in phase. If they're out of phase, they're gonna not ever sound good in the mix process. So make sure you go through all of these different steps first, instead of just randomly throwing microphones in front of things and then trying to make them sound good in the mixing process. If you do that and you get good at that, you're gonna thank me so much when your mixes start to sound so much better. Second, you don't need plugins on every single track. Now that sounds like heresy or blasphemy to some people, probably, but the reality is that you just don't need plugins on every single track. I, for years, have been throwing EQ and compression on every single track until I kind of realized, hey, actually, I don't need to do that. You know, sometimes I'd be mixing a track and I'd be getting near to the end of the mixing process, and then I would come across a track that doesn't have anything on it, and I'm like, wait a second, that actually sounds really good in how it's sitting in the mix already. So use your ears and don't default to the habits that you already always do. And that honestly goes hand in hand with the first thing. If your tracks are really well recorded, then not every single thing is going to need EQ on it. That's kind of the point, right? If you're recording things to sit well and gel well together in the mix phase while you're on the recording side, then when you're in the mix phase, you're not gonna have to do as much work to make everything sound good. Third, you do not need the fanciest plugins or the hottest new or in mixing technique. You don't. Just using very simple plugins, primarily EQ and compression, you can get your mixes like 90-95% of the way there. Now, obviously, time-based delays like reverb and EQ and things like de-essers and, things like that are still very important and very helpful, but even just your EQ and your compression, those things are like the bread and butter of mixing. If you already have really well-recorded tracks and you're going into the mixing phase, if you really need to grab just a couple things, make sure you grab an EQ and a compressor. Now, what EQ and compressor you want to use, that's totally up to you. That's a whole nother video. But at the end of the day, they all kind of more or less do the same kinds of things. They all have different sonic characteristics for sure. And some sound better than others, or some do something a little bit better than others. That's definitely true. But if you have a decent EQ that you know how to use really well, and you have a decent compressor that you know how to use really well, you're gonna already get like 90%, 95% of the way there for your entire mix of the song. Now, this really stuck out to me when I started watching really, really incredible A-list mixers kind of doing their thing. The difference between the way that they mix and the way that I was mixing at the time is that I would think I would need like 10 or maybe 8 or 6 plugins on a track. But sometimes they only had like an EQ, a compressor, maybe a couple other things, a saturator, but they kept it pretty lean. The difference in how they used them, though, is that they were not afraid to push the heck out of things. And I was afraid to push compressors past like 5 decibels of gain reduction, which is nonsense. You don't need to do that at all. I don't do that anymore whatsoever. And I was afraid to like really push EQs. Now, that is a whole nother video that comes from a lot of the time mixing with your eyes instead of your ears. But the point is, make sure when you're mixing things, make sure you are shaping things so that they sound good together in the cohesive whole of the song. If that means you need to make like an 8 decibel cut in something so that something else sits in that spot better, then do that. Don't be afraid to make those big drastic moves. And as soon as you kind of get used to making those kinds of moves and doing what the song requires to sound good, your mixes are immediately going to level up. So all of that to say, for the next mix that you're working on, I challenge you to only use 2 to maybe 4 plugins total for the entire mix, and focus on actually using those plugins the way that they're intended. If you're using a compressor, focus on actually using it to limit the dynamic range of the tracks, and do that in comparison to the rest of the song as a whole. Right? Stop mixing and soloing tracks. Make your mixing moves in context of the entire song. So that's what I challenge you to do. And honestly, I think you're going to be surprised with how far you can get your mix to go and how good you're going to get it to sound by limiting yourself to only 4 plugins. And really, really take your time to learn those plugins. And then when you feel confident with those plugins, maybe add 1 or 2 more plugins to the next mix you're working on. All right, mix tip number 4, mix quickly. Mix quickly. I just recently put out a song that I had been mixing on and off for like 1.5 years, almost 2 years. And I sent it to a friend, Spencer Annis. He's an amazing guy, amazing mixer, really, really talented and skilled at what he does. But I sent my song to him and I was like, hey man, can you just roast this mix? And he was like, bro, like, to be honest, this mix needs a lot of work. And I think one of the biggest reasons that I did not get that mix to the point that it needed to be at was because I had been listening to it for so long. So I came back to the song and I pretty much started over, and I gave myself like a few hours to mix it. It was like something like maybe 5 hours to mix it. And I sat down and I made the majority of the changes in like the first few hours. And then it was just a matter of like automating and tweaking things. But that mix sounded way better in like a day and a half than it did in the whole like 1.5 years, 2 years of mixing it on and off. And so mix quickly, make your decisions really, really fast, and don't second guess every single thing you do. And if you're making those changes in the context of the entire song, then you're going to be able to identify what changes actually need to happen and what changes don't, and you're not gonna be second guessing yourself nearly as much. Not to mention, if you're mixing quickly and you're kind of just like going with your gut instincts for like what changes need to happen, then your ears are not gonna be nearly as fatigued by the time you get to the end of the mixing process, and you're gonna be making way more accurate decisions in your mixing as well. Lastly, and this is a skill that I am honestly still trying to learn after like a decade of mixing, and that is prioritize the mid-range. Now, the first time that I heard this concept was probably 2 or 3 years ago in a Cult Caparoon video titled "The Magic is in the Mid-Range." If you haven't seen it, I encourage you to go check it out. Honestly, it totally changed the way that I approach mixing altogether. And in this song that I just put out recently, again, one of the biggest mistakes that I made in mixing that song after listening to it a billion times is that I was not really focusing on the mid-range. I was trying to make the bass sound full, and I was trying to make the high end sound crisp. Now that led to problems because it didn't sound as good on all of the different sound sources that I was listening to. So it didn't translate all that well. I thought it did at the time, but in listening back, the mid-range was all out of whack. And so the song didn't sound full. Like on smaller speakers, it sounded kind of tinny, kind of brittle, and that low end was not coming through in the way that I thought it needed to. And so the goal should be making sure your song sounds balanced across the entire frequency spectrum, right? You don't want your low end to sound super, super crazy booming and your mid-range to be super lacking and your high end to be super bright. You want it to feel balanced, especially if you're using honest studio monitors. The goal is to make sure that everything has its own space in the mix. That's really the ultimate goal, so that everything sounds and feels balanced and ultimately tells the story of the song and helps elevate the emotion of the production. That's really your goal when it comes to mixing. So all that to say, prioritize the mid-range. If you can get everything from like 300 to like 2,500-ish hertz, somewhere in that ballpark, to sound really, really good and balanced, then your mix is going to sound really solid and it's going to translate really, really well. So if you have like a monitoring software or something like that that you can audition different speakers on, I would encourage you try doing that and maybe using like an Auratone preset to capture like a mid-range sounding speaker. Or maybe if you have the budget, go ahead and buy yourself some mid-range focused monitors. Or if you don't have any of those things, one thing that I do, and I got this again from Colt because he's definitely better than I am, but throw an EQ on your master bus and kind of filter it down to just be that mid-rangey section. And that's a really, really good way to check your mixes and to see if they feel full and if you can hear everything in just that frequency spectrum. And if you can, then you're honestly pretty much set up for success. So friends, thanks so much for being here. Those are the 5 tips that I have to help your mixes sound a lot better and to really improve. So let me know if you try these tips and let me know how they improve your mixes or if they don't improve your mixes. And if you have any tips for me, feel free to leave them down in the comment section below. And if you want to be a part of supporting my channel and joining a community, then you can check out my Patreon. There are 4 tiers. There's a free tier where I leak song lyrics and give early access to different videos. There's another tier where I give early access to songs. And there's 2 other tiers for $10 and $25. Those are the highest tiers. And on those, I live stream. There are exclusive Discord chats. There are Q&As. There are production and mixing tutorial breakdowns and all of those kinds of things, and they're full length. I post abridged versions of those on YouTube, but I post the full length, unedited, super chill versions on Patreon for you to kind of just come and chill and hang out and see the full breakdown of these songs. So if any of those things sound like they would bring value to you, then I would encourage you, go check that out on patreon.com/iomusic. And again, I really appreciate you being here, and I'll see you very soon with a new video, as always. Peace out!